My game of the year is Cocoon. While I've played a lot of other games, including all of the games that everyone else on the team will have no doubt mentioned in this video, Cocoon is the one that's going to stay with me the longest. It's so smart. The way it kind of layers worlds within worlds and it works with the puzzles, it makes you feel simultaneously very stupid and very clever. And I don't think I'm going to forget that feeling of how I suddenly realised how it was all working for a very long time. So that is why Cocoon is definitely my game of the year.
I think it's safe to say that one thing video games will be remembered for in 2023 is choice. Is really driving players towards owning their decisions in games. And with that in mind, I don't think it's any surprise that something like Baldur's Gate 3 is topping so many Game of the Year lists across the board. For me personally, the best game in 2023 for doing that was Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Even more so than Breath of the Wild a few years ago, this game made me feel really part of its world. It made me feel that my decisions mattered and that with a bit of imagination I could overcome anything. And basically Nintendo have given players the tools to manipulate and interpret the world as they choose, whether you want to build a sword or a shield or a plane or a boat. You know, no obstacle was too small or too big to be overcome with a little bit of invention and a little bit of innovation. And I think that's been further perpetuated by the games community, who are still making weird and wonderful and sublime and ridiculous creations to, climb mountains or overcome bosses. And yeah, I think that sense of freedom, that sense of responsibility, and that sense of creation and imagination is what is keeping me coming back to Tears of the Kingdom even now. And I suspect that'll be the case well into 2024 and beyond.
Hi, I'm Serena. I'm the social media editor for GamesRadar, and my favourite game of 2023 has got to be Dave the Diver. Dave the Diver can simultaneously be one of the most relaxing games you'll play and one of the most stressful. That's when you're being chased by a big shark. I love the quirky premise of the game, where you're diving deep into the ocean to catch fish, which you then sell at a sushi restaurant that you manage by night. My favourite thing about the game is the harpoon mechanic that you use to catch fish. It is equally as satisfying as performing a backstab in a FromSoft game. There's so many layers to Dave the Diver, and there's a lot of mini-games as well, but not at any point does it feel overcrowded or disjointed. It's one of the most fun games that I've played in a long time. I absolutely could not put this game down, and that's why Dave the Diver is my favourite game of 2023.
My game of the year is Baldur's Gate 3, because of course it is, because what else was it going to be? It is the game of the year, it's brilliant, it's diverse and clever and deep and layered and well written. It is the perfect example of what we saw years ago in The Witcher 3, where there is no substitute for just putting in a hell of a lot of effort. Across the board, we see it just hitting it out of the park each time. They're still adding to it, they're still making it deeper and richer and smarter, not just by patching bugs and stuff, but by adding new content and new angles and new ways to play. It's exactly the sort of game that I thought couldn't be made. As someone who's been playing D&D for years, you think, there's no way you could translate that kind of depth and richness and potential into mechanical systems that by their very nature have to limit you, but they kind of nailed it, or at least got as close as I think it is possible to get within a video game. And that's so cool and so clever, and everyone at Larian deserves so much credit for that. And that's why it's Game of the Year, because I don't think we'll see anything like it again for a very long time.
My game of the year is one that surprised me, which was Amnesia the Bunker. Now, that's a series that's normally kind of very familiar, lots of linear narrative horror, but this was a much more kind of immersive sim open world game, and I think all the better for it. Instead of following a story and getting jump scares along the way, you have to sort of navigate a bunker and try and escape. Things like a grenade could be just as much use fighting the monster as it is opening a door, for example. And the sheer kind of way it opened up and gave you the freedom to explore within its normal kind of horror environment, I thought was really clever, really interesting. I was really impressed with how it did it all. It also features the generator, which is how you keep the lights on in the bunker, and that keeps the monster away, which is possibly one of the most terrifying things I think a horror game has ever done, because you are responsible for fueling the generator. If you run out of gas, the lights go out, and that is on you, and it's all your fault. So yeah, I think it was a really impressive twist on a very familiar game and a great horror game that really surprised me this year.
My game of the year for 2023 is Marvel Spider-Man 2. While it might not have hit quite as hard as Marvel Spider-Man 1, I would say that it's still worthy of being up there with all the top games of this year. For me, there's always at least one game which is in that top 5 conversation. It's maybe not number 1, it's maybe not number 2 for most people, but it's either 3, 4, or 5, and that's because it's just so much fun to play, right? Insomniac do such a great job of making these games as fun as we've always imagined, swinging around New York City as Peter Parker or Miles Morales. For that reason, it's one of those games, it's like Super Mario Odyssey, it's like Dying Light, where you talk to people and they just start smiling because they have so much fun playing those games. So for that reason, Marvel Spider-Man 2 has to be one of the games of the year.
I might technically have played thousands of hours of Pokemon Sleep in my sleep, but my actual game of the year is Baldur's Gate 3, and I think mostly that's because of the impact that it has had and has continued to have throughout this whole year, throughout all summer and into the autumn and into the winter. I like to think of Game of the Year as the game that is the most impactful, that keeps people talking about it. So last year for me it was Elden Ring, even though that was a game I never really played. It was a game that we continued to interact with in fascinating ways all year long. And that's exactly what is happening with Baldur's Gate 3. People are still inventing fascinating new ways of playing. People are still hyper engaged in the characters, in the world, in what you can do in that world. And beyond that, I think what Baldur's Gate has done that's fascinating is be the first game that I remember that really elevates the people who brought its characters to life beyond just the characters that they play. It's been fascinating to see the success that people like Astarion, actor Neil Newbon have had at the award ceremonies, but also the community that exists and has continued to exist around the rest of that origin cast, and more broadly than that. And I think that's a fascinating testament to how big a deal this has been in a way that pushes the boundaries in all sorts of ways, but also has cultivated something that has a real lasting impact that I think we will feel beyond the end of this year and well into next. And, you know, fingers crossed for an expansion very soon, please.
My game of the year is Alan Wake 2 from Remedy Entertainment. It is a awesome spiral into darkness, a horror story that is haunting two interweaving realities, and it is just one of the most imaginative, creative adventure games I think I've ever played. It looks stunning, absolutely phenomenal game design, and it just does a fantastic job of taking everything that Remedy has done so well throughout the last 20 plus years, packing it into one game and just taking it further than you could ever possibly imagine. It's weird, it's wonderful, it's pretty damn scary. And Alan Wake 2 is without question my game of the year for 2023.
So my favourite game of the year is Baldur's Gate 3, which probably isn't surprising as I'm Tabletop merch editor. It's because I feel like it's the best D&D starter set that you can get. It's so much easier to understand what you can and can't do, because if you can't do something, it tells you no, whereas in the tabletop version, it's kind of up to your DM and how kind they want to be. The Baldur's Gate 3 DM is a massive dick, and he won't let you get away with anything. So yeah, that's why it's my game of the year.